Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another session of Chicago Master Singers University. My name is John Hughes, and I'm honored to be the music director of CMS. Welcome to a very special episode of CMS University. We're joined tonight by 4 soloists who would have appeared with us this season were it not for the pandemic. Now, I have a series of kind of prepared questions that I'll be asking them, and we'll have a conversation. But one of the best parts of this YouTube live platform is that you can interact with each other, with me, and with the soloist. The first thing you need to do is log into YouTube, and then you'll be able to participate in the chat, which is going on the right-hand side of your screen. You'll see people are already saying hello to each other and sharing good news. And this is a way you can communicate throughout this evening with each other. Now, if you have a question you'd like me to ask the soloists, please start it with 3 or 4 question marks in a row. And then at the end of the evening, we'll do kind of a lightning round of your questions with them, and we'll get them answered as best we can. So no need to feel like you have to be a member of CMS to participate in the chat or to ask a question. If you're here tonight, you're part of our online community, and so ask away. All right, without any further ado, let me welcome our 4 soloists, Katelyn, Margaret, Klaus, and Keven. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Chicago Master Singers University.
Hi.
Hey.
Hello.
Hey. So let's start maybe just going from top to bottom, starting with our soprano, Katelyn. And if you could just tell our viewers a little bit about yourselves and your training and background.
Sure. Hello, everyone. It's great to be here. My training, I actually started singing in choirs. My mother is a music teacher, and she started a community children's choir program that I sang in from, I believe, first grade all the way through high school. So that was my first background in singing. And then as I got into high school, I started taking voice lessons, really fell in love with classical singing, and decided that that's what I wanted to pursue in college. So I went to, get ready for this long name, the University of Cincinnati College Conservatory of Music, or CCM, for my Bachelor of Music degree in voice. And then I did my master's degree at Indiana University. And directly following that, I decided to move to Chicago. I have family here and had always grown up coming here and just loved the city and the excitement of it all. So I came here and got my first gig actually with Music of the Baroque, another organization here in Chicago. And slowly through the years, I've just been auditioning and sort of getting to know the city, and you get to know people. And so you start to build up that repertoire of gigs. And so now I'm singing all over, and I've met all of these wonderful people through doing that.
Excellent.
How about you, Margaret?
Well, that's interesting that you mentioned the children's choir, because I wasn't even thinking about that. But I also started singing in children's choir in church. I grew up in Nashville, Tennessee, and my parents actually started me on violin, so I think that helped with ear training. Always loved to sing. I sang with the Blair Children's Chorus, which is connected with Vanderbilt University. So I kind of learned a lot about music there. And then about in high school, my parents asked if I wanted to take voice lessons, and I was like, "You can take singing lessons? What?" I thought it was just what people did, you know? So I switched from violin focus to singing. And then I went to school at Illinois Wesleyan in Bloomington, Illinois for my undergrad. Took 2 years off living in Chicago. And that's kind of where I sang with the Chicago Symphony Chorus in Grant Park for that 2-year stint. And then decided I wanted to go back to grad school. And so went up to Madison, UW-Madison. And did my grad school there. And about that time, my husband and I were talking about moving in together. And so we stayed in the area. But, now that I have a prolific sort of choral gig or whatever, performing with choral groups, I realized that Chicago is really probably one of the best areas to be in, because I think just, in touch with other colleagues, like you don't hear of a more prolific area for that sort of music. So I'm glad that fate brought me to this area, so that I can sing with all my new colleagues and groups in this area. So yeah.
Excellent. We're glad you're here too, Margaret.
Yay!
Klaus, our tenor.
Hi, I'm Klaus Georg, and as you can probably tell from my name, I'm not originally from the United States. I was actually born in Germany, and my mother is Italian, so very lucky for a singer. I grew up bilingual German-Italian, and then we came to the United States when I was in second grade. So I grew up in Colorado, really. Excuse me. My musical education started a little later than most professional musicians. I did a little bit of piano when I was a kid, and I was exposed to classical music. My aunt is a professional chorus singer in Rome, in the opera chorus in Rome. But I didn't really start singing in choir until I was in high school. And I cantored at my Catholic church where at that age, and immediately got really, really interested in singing. So by my senior year in high school, I was in 3 different choirs in all state, and doing cantoring and all sorts of other singing. My undergrad was originally mathematics. I went to Washington University in St. Louis for mathematics, and while I was there, added a music major. And I did get the double major still, but my final year there was only music classes, or my final semester there was only music classes. So at that point, the writing was on the wall, I think. And I stayed on for my master's. So I was in St. Louis for 6 years at Wash U. And then that's also where I met my wife. We met when I was a sophomore, and dated throughout college, and then decided to get married after that. So after my master's, actually after her master's. And so at that point, her field is museums. She has a degree in museum studies, and so at that point we knew that we needed to move to some big city somewhere. You can't really do classical singing in museums anywhere small, really. And so we were deciding between New York, Chicago, San Francisco. No real family connections to any of them, and we had visited Chicago several times when we lived in St. Louis, and so we really like the city, and also you get a little bit more runway with your rent in Chicago than you do in San Francisco or New York, and so we moved here. And it was a great move because, as Margaret said, Chicago is a great city for choral singing especially, so it's a great way to start out as a singer. New York is the city that always gets all the reputation for where you go to make it as any sort of artist, but Chicago, I find, has an enormous amount of opportunities for between my first gig, just like Katelyn, was also Music of the Baroque. Wonderful organization. I sing with Chicago Symphony Orchestra. I'm a section leader over there and have been with them for a long time now. But I also sing at Lyric, and I've done a lot of soloist work around here too. And I was always interested in teaching. So after my master's, I started teaching privately. I taught in some high schools in the Chicago area at Maine South. I was just talking to John about that because that's where he went to high school. And Orland Park down in the southern suburbs, Carl Sandburg specifically. And then after doing a little bit of gigging, a little bit of teaching, I decided to get my doctorate and really make teaching a serious focus of mine in addition to singing. So I got my doctorate at Northwestern University in 2014, I think, so about 6-7 years ago. And in the meantime, I've started teaching at Loyola, where I've been teaching for a long time. I started teaching there when I started my doctorate. And I started teaching at Carthage College when I started my doctorate, and then moved to Loyola 2 years in. And I also teach at UIC, and I still have a private studio. So I've been doing a lot of teaching and a lot of singing as well. It's a wonderful life. And my wife got a job at the Field Museum, so Chicago was the right move for us.
Perfect. Keven?
I guess that leaves me.
Yeah.
I started out mostly as an instrumentalist on piano and then on trumpet. I did some singing in elementary and junior high, but it wasn't really until I got to college that I started singing. And then I kind of went a little bit crazy. I was singing in 2 choirs and 2 different a cappella groups, and anywhere that anyone would have me. My bachelor's degree ended up in physics, not too dissimilar to Klaus. I took plenty of math at the same time. And then I worked using my physics degree in a whole nother lifetime, and realized that was not really where I wanted to be spending my time. So I went back and got a master's degree in voice from Northwestern. And during all this time, I was singing with all the groups that everyone's mentioned so far: Music of the Baroque, Chicago Symphony, Grant Park, Lyric Opera, as well as doing solo gigs around town with different organizations. I too eventually decided to make teaching the large focus of my career, and I finished my doctorate a year before Klaus. I think I finished mine in 2013. He was nipping at my heels the whole time, and I have been teaching at Northwestern University since then.
Wonderful. Well, we don't have to necessarily go in order for these, so just whoever has a response, just jump in. I guess my first kind of formal question would be, we're going into the 11th month here since the world kind of shut down. I remember my last concert was March 6th, and then my next one was supposed to be March 13th, and it never happened, right? So we're almost, we're coming up to a year of this. How's it been going? And we all know that it's been tremendously challenging, but one of the things that I think is really remarkable is that musicians and so many other industries have found creative ways to continue making music, even if it's not what we would normally be doing. So how's this year been, and how are you finding ways to be creative?
Well, maybe I'll start since I see I'm the only one unmuted, but because I had a moment this weekend, because honestly, I've got 2 young boys. I've got a 4-year-old and my youngest will be 2 in May. So they're very active. So I think we all kind of had that first moment of shock, mourning, grieving, like disbelief. We went through all those stages. And then you kind of just went on with your life. And you kind of, at least this weekend, you don't realize how much it hits you until you're kind of alone. I was just running some errands and just harmless, in the car by myself, and Mozart's Mass in C minor comes on. And I just start weeping, like uncontrollably. And so it's hard to know if that's my memories of the performing, or if it's the music itself. And I know it's both, because that kind of speaks to the power of it. And so that gives you, reminds you that that's still inside of us. And, just because we're staying busy with other things doesn't mean that we've lost that or anything. But yes, teaching still, a lot of learning of new tech stuff, a lot of painting the house, a lot of projects. So I know, let's see, Keven, you've been pretty busy with your kids too. Tell us about that.
Right. I have 3 boys, and the year has, as gigs kept getting canceled, and some were, tried to get rescheduled for later dates, and that just obviously never ended up working out. The same kind of thing, just focusing on teaching and trying to get my creativity out in my students as much as possible, but largely focusing on getting my kids to school and through school, and their mental health. I mean, this has been really hard for my 7 and 10-year-old, especially, the lack of social contact. And I don't know. I worry about my 7-year-old in particular, because he he's trained now for the last year to like walk away from anyone who happens to come near him, whether they be friendly or not. And anyway, so spending a lot of time working on children and their mental health and my own. Certainly grieving the loss of music. I was supposed to sing Jesus in a St. Matthew Passion last spring, and Beethoven 9 and the Choral Fantasy, because it was Beethoven's 250th or something. And I was sad to see all those things disappear. I've never done the 9th, and I would love to do it with an orchestra and a chorus. And maybe that will happen when Beethoven is 251. Who knows? We'll see. I'll keep my fingers crossed. Klaus, you also have kids, don't you?
Yeah, and the Beethoven connection. I was actually born in Bonn in Germany, which is where Beethoven is from. So I was really looking forward to celebrating the 250th, both with CSO and with Grant Park and as a soloist. So a lot of canceled gigs there. I had an evangelist that I was going to go do up in Wisconsin that unfortunately fell through. Hopefully that gets rescheduled when we can. So, I would be lying if I said I didn't miss singing. Fortunately for those of us who have a heavy teaching load, that has continued, and teaching voice remotely works pretty well. In fact, I think most of my students are progressing as much as they were in person. So from that standpoint, at least from continuing to work and continuing to earn, and pay mortgages and stuff, I've been very lucky, as I see those of you nodding, many of us have. Also, a lot of the organizations in Chicago have really done right by singers, in that we have, received partial payments of our contracts, even if we never even showed up to a single rehearsal and things like that, which I was very, very grateful for. And like Margaret, I've learned a lot about audio technology. As you can see, I've got some fancy stuff here. I enjoy putting together some, what are they called? Virtual choir videos as well. I am the conductor. In addition to being a singer, I'm a conductor at Beth Emmet, the Free Synagogue in Evanston. And so we did a whole 100% virtual High Holidays this year with a significant number of pieces, quite a bit of music, and Katelyn actually was my soprano for that, so I got to hear Katelyn's lovely voice in my earphones a lot this summer while I put together those videos, and learned everything about Adobe Premiere Pro. Well, everything. I wish I'd learned everything about Adobe Premiere Pro. I learned a little bit about Adobe Premiere Pro and Audition and all those kinds of technologies. So, it's definitely been different. I also have kids, as Keven kind of said. I have a 6-year-old and an 11-year-old, and they have their days of things going really, really well, and their days where it's harder. So the world has changed. I'm optimistic that we're rounding the corner here, and that performances are going to start coming back. Live performances are going to start coming back, and we have developed skills that will be useful even after the pandemic is over. For example, from now on, anytime I can't be at the studio in person, rather than canceling lessons, I know that I have a backup plan that works. Or if a student is sick, but not too sick to sing, but maybe too sick to come in, or there's a commute issue or whatever, I know I can teach a remote voice lesson whenever. So there are certainly things that are looking better. But I can't wait to sing again, especially something like a Bach Passion or a Mozart Requiem or something like that. There's no feeling like that. So I think Katelyn, as my soprano in my ear, I'm going to hand it off to you.
Oh man, you poor thing. I have to give Klaus a huge shout out because he got me up off my butt this summer. I was like so depressed. I mean, I had the initial shock like everybody else did, but then I think finding out that I think I always had summer in the back of my mind as like, it's going to be fine. Everything's going to be good this summer. I'm going to do Grant Park. I'm going to be at Ravinia, all this stuff. And when that was all wiped clean, and I was supposed to be not only a chorus member with Grant Park, but I was supposed to be a soloist this summer. And it's going to be so cool. And I was so stoked about it. And I think that was the final straw for me. So I was just I stopped singing. It's whatever, I'm just gonna sit at the pool And we like stayed at my husband's parents' house. We were house sitting for them. And I was just like at the pool, like, okay, this is what I'm doing. And then I get an email from Klaus, and he's like, I want you to sing all this stuff. We're going to do a virtual High Holidays choir. And I was like, okay. And so it like got me going again, and, you know, learning all the technology too. I mean, Klaus had to like hold my hand a lot of the time, because I was like, how do I use a mic? So he was so helpful and put up with a lot, but it really like got me back on my feet, back in practice. And like after that, some other things have slowly trickled in. I got to do like a COVID safe live solo gig with Music of the Baroque, which was amazing. And it was like the best day ever. And like recording that, and I'm doing a full virtual season with Chicago Acapella. So things are happening, and I'm also lucky to be teaching, and my studio has grown a little bit just with more time on my hands. So, you know, trying to remember all of those things and just be grateful, and maybe this summer we'll see a few things trickle in.
Yeah,
I hope.
so. It's neat to hear too that, you know, musicians do, you know, look out for each other, right, and help each other and create gigs for each other, and I think that's really encouraging. I don't think every career path is like that. So one question I thought might be interesting to our viewers, who predominantly are singers, is just, you know, you all are very accomplished. You have a lot of training from some very prestigious institutions, and I guess what I'm interested in hearing is, you know, if you could talk to yourself 10 years ago, is there something that you would tell your younger self, you know, not to focus so much on, or, you know, you really should focus more on this, you know? Is there just something that this perspective has given you about what's really important in singing?
I have something more like 20 years ago, Klaus. Okay. But so it's interesting. I went through kind of an interesting vocal journey, which many people have gone through the same journey. But I was a baritone in high school. Actually, when I first started, I was a bass 2, and then on every single competition I sang, every single audition I sang, everybody's like, "Oh yeah, that sounds great, beautiful voice, so on. Are you sure you're not a tenor?" And so I got this kind of tenor complex when I was a freshman in college, and my teacher too said, you know, like, yeah, you're probably a tenor. You know, you don't have the high notes yet, so let's not sing tenor yet. But so in the back of my mind was this idea, like, I'm actually a tenor. And so I started trying to sing tenor repertoire, and I started trying to force my voice higher and higher and higher. And I wish I could go back and say, just stay a baritone for 2 or 3 more years. It's not, you know, it's not a failure to sing baritone, first of all. And second, I think becoming more comfortable in the middle of the voice, the rest of the voice will develop. Whereas constantly trying to push the voice in one direction, all of it kind of gets stunted a little bit if you're not careful. And so eventually, you know, I got it sorted out. But I feel like I could have saved myself, first of all, a lot of psychological heartache, but also probably saved myself a few years of developmental time if I had just listened to my voice and listened to my body and taken my time with that transition a little bit more. And I think in the end, the voice will kind of go where it's going to go. So it's not like by singing in a certain range, you pigeonhole yourself into that category forever. But I think, yeah, especially, you know, my realization that I made so many years later was that breath support is not really about pushing more air through the sound. And it's about controlling the air. And if I had just focused on that instead of trying to sing high notes badly, that would have helped. And then the other thing is, I wish I had gotten into music technology a little bit sooner. Because now I have all these cool things that I'd like to try to do, and, you know, like, oh, maybe I could do some MIDI composition or some synthesized orchestra stuff, or what, all these kinds of ideas I wish I'd kind of dabbled with. And of course, once you have an established career, an established routine, and kids and a mortgage and so on, it's harder to add different things to your life. Not that you can't learn new things, but all those hours I had in college, I would have loved to have at least taken some music technology courses, some composition, you know, film composition or whatever, just to learn some of those things that now I find interesting, but at the time I was kind of poo-pooing them as live music and opera specifically is the only thing that matters, and singing tenor in an opera specifically is the only thing that matters. So I guess to be patient and to listen to what your voice tells you.
Yeah.
It's almost as if someone had said, hey, there's going to be a pandemic in 2020. You're going to want to know that technology.
Mm-hmm.
That would have been nice to know, like, hey, you're going to be in a career that's going to be most affected by this. But but that's interesting, Klaus, you said, because I went through the same complex with mezzo-soprano, and I never like publicly tried to present myself as soprano, but I will say trying to work on that rep, I think just helped with my technique anyways. And then just with age, your voice just kind of settles. But I wished that, so when I was in school, and I feel like now it's even kind of changing this, but the idea was that you had to get into these young artist programs, and that was just like one path. So if I'd known that, you will be able to make your own path, there will be different opportunities. You don't have to just go this one way, because the odds, I mean, it's just strictly a numbers thing. The amount of positions or the amount of these gigs versus the amount of people applying for them or auditioning for them, odds are not in your favor. And so, I got so close to a lot of them, and it never panned out. So the amount of doubt that puts in your mind and your psyche, and like it kind of just piles on top of each other. It's a lot of like self work that you have to do after that amount of rejection and stuff. So kind of once you got to a point where you realize, like, okay, this is not the path I'm going, and you just start to focus on your craft and trust yourself as an artist, because that's when doors started opening. And along with that, like, I wish I had not worried about what to wear so much. Like that was just a big thing too. I just remember in school, like not only did you have to sing perfectly, but you had to present yourself perfectly. And not that I'm not saying that the way you present yourself is not important, but I don't know if it was so challenging for me because it was coming out of high school where I was just like a nerd, and like I didn't really, the places I performed were church where you wear a robe and children's choir where you're all wearing the same thing. So this idea of like having to present yourself, and and I got a little excited about like, ooh, what am I going to wear? What dress am I going to wear? Blah, blah, blah. But the amount of energy that took away from just focusing on the music, like it was not worth it. And, and just not feeling comfortable yet in what, literally not feeling comfortable in my shoes. So all of that just takes away, so if I really feel like sometimes that was just filler back in school. Like, okay, well, we talked about the music, like, hey, this is what you should wear to an audition, blah, blah, blah. And a few people along the way were like, it's really the music is most important. But I wish kind of I had that in my mind. And now, like, this year's been the best. Like, we just get to wear whatever we want. And so I want somebody to commission the sweatpants oratorio, because I'll be like first in line for that.
Sweatpants oratorio with half a second delay, right?
Right.
Into the music.
Yeah. So
I have to say, as a guy, the whole what are you going to wear thing is so much easier. What are you going to wear? I'm going to wear black shoes and a suit. I mean, what else would I wear? The only thing we have to stress about is the color of the shirt, the tie. I mean, it's not complicated. But going along with some of the stuff that you were talking about is I would, and I wish the voice work, that the degrees that I had talked more about business and marketing and all of that. How are contracts? what are the career paths once you have a degree in music? And the emphasis, at least in my degrees, was so much on making music that I didn't have a great sense of how the business worked when I finished. And like everyone else here, you figure it out as you go along. You get the first gig and you meet people, and then you get a second gig, and you build it up that way. But I wish someone had explained to me, like Klaus was saying, that you don't have to just sing opera. That's not the only way to make a living in music, and you don't have to just be a soloist. You can have you can sing chorus with this group and sing a soloist with this one and conduct that one, and teach at another place and piece together a living that way. And I know that was not explained terribly well to me, and I suspect it wasn't explained terribly well to anyone else either. So that's what I would tell my 10-year-old 20-year ago persona, for sure.
Yes, the business class thing, 100%. That should be part of any of these degree programs. Like, we all come out of school not knowing anything about that, and that is such a huge part of this career. And also, going along with things you guys have said, yes, going to a conservatory, I think there was just so much pressure to get into these young artist programs. And it was this idea that you won't be successful unless you are a soloist at the Metropolitan Opera. And like, that's what I had in my mind as what a successful career was going to be. And of course, my career has turned out nothing like that. And I'm okay with that. And moving to Chicago, I think getting into the choral scene, because that is a huge thing here. And it's also a huge moneymaker here. And it's great music, and it's wonderful. And it took me back to like how I got started, and just accepting that you're still a working musician. Like, I get to live here and be a working musician. And no, it's not just solo work. It's solo work, it's choral work, it's teaching, but like, I get to make a living as a musician doing the things that I learned to do in school. And then also, as something that I thought of was, I wish if I could have told myself 10 years ago, I wish I hadn't let my teachers and coaches dictate everything that I was singing. There was so much pressure for me. I was singing really high soprano stuff, coloratura, high coloratura, Queen of the Nights, Zerbinets, all this stuff. But you can't tell, but I'm tall. I'm quite tall. And I would get told in auditions, oh, well, that's great, but you're tall. You're going to be taller than the tenors. And I'm like, what am I supposed to do about that? But, I was always singing the things that my teachers and coaches were telling me to sing, and I didn't always connect to those pieces of music, and I didn't always enjoy singing them. But it was like, this is your five, we have this 5 aria package we all had to have, and you have to have, this has to be in there. And so what pieces would be chosen for me in auditions, but the ones that I didn't like. And so how does that read in an audition? Not well. They can tell. And so I wish I had and that's what I'm doing now, that I'm into my 30s. I'm only singing the things that I want to sing. And who cares? Who cares about these 5 arias? I mean, it doesn't matter. In the grand scheme of things, none of that matters. And yeah, I think I could have had a few more. I mean, who knows? Because it's subjective, but I think I could have had a few more successful auditions had I been living by that, living in that mindset.
I think the world is changing a little bit with respect to that. I think students are, at least I find students are coming to me more with pieces that they would like to sing. And I think there's a real movement to try to find pieces by underrepresented composers nowadays. for whatever unrepresented for whatever reason, underrepresented. Composers of color, women composers, just anybody outside the canon, the traditional canon, and so a lot of I don't want to say new music, not in the sense of newly composed music, but also contemporary music. But a lot of previously unearthed music is being sung, and so I think that gives students the opportunity to find things that they really connect to. And I agree, Katelyn, like the most important thing is connecting to the music. And that's one of the things that's difficult to teach, if not impossible. The genuine connection and the genuine communication of a piece of music is more important than the actual piece of music.
Mm-hmm. So you all have these great careers that you got you're very diversified, right, in what you do and in what you sing, right? And I guess my next question is kind of, what is your preparation process like? Is it the same or different if you're preparing a, recital of art songs versus preparing to sing Mozart Requiem with a chorus like CMS versus singing an operatic role? What are the similarities and differences between those preparation processes?
I mean, for me, it all starts in the same place. When you're singing, it always starts with a text. And the text and the music kind of simultaneously, but I usually start with the text. And then the first thing I do is look at how the composer interpreted that text. And it doesn't matter if it's opera or Mozart, oratorio or art song or whatever. If there are words, then the composer has an opinion on those words. So the first thing I do is understand the words for myself and understand the composer's opinion. I was just doing this with a student this morning. He was singing Mache dich mein Herz herein from
It's beautiful.
St. Matthew. Yeah. And as I started with the text, I'd never looked at this particular piece before in detail. And as soon as I started with the text, I saw all these things that Bach was doing, where when he's talking about Jesus coming into his heart and Jesus going into his grave, in both cases, the notes descend. And it's like, so he draws that parallel musically as well as the parallel that's there in the text. And I was reminded of this principle this morning while teaching and thought, oh yes, I'll definitely be mentioning that tonight. But it always starts there. And if you think the meaning of the words while you're singing them, and you faithfully repeat the notes that the composer wrote down with tasteful embellishments where appropriate, it pretty much takes care of your job. I mean, that's pretty much what you need to do. I don't think acting is necessarily something that you have to do very much, as long as you are really understanding and communicating the text and connecting emotionally to the music. That said, I don't do a ton of opera, and I know in opera sometimes you have to go a little bigger for it to read on stage. I do opera chorus. I've sung with the Lyric Opera of Chicago for about 10 seasons now, but not regularly as a regular member. So, a show here and there. And I've done some solo opera work, but relatively little compared to the oratorio work. But I think for oratorio and for art song, it's like you're reading a story out loud on pitch, kind of.
Well, that's the big debate, right? Music or text, right? So I think deep down, it's music. No. But I remember, yes, the text, very important. But I would always love to listen to the whole piece first. And so I remember back in school, in grad school, so this was about 15 or 12 years ago, I would go to the music library and check it out and sit in my little cubby and grab the score and listen to the whole piece. And then I remember halfway through grad school being at a colleague's house, and she pulled up Una voce poco fa on YouTube. She's like, hey, did you know you can watch these operas on YouTube? I was like, what's YouTube? So that was the beginning of that. So now, even, I often wonder if I was still in school, and I still think I would take the time to have that special connection, go to the library and just sit down with an archival recording and listen to it. So I would listen to it first and follow along and read what that text was, just to kind of get the whole picture. But yeah, going along with opera versus like oratorio versus art song. I mean, really, the biggest difference with opera is that you just have literally a lot of staging to incorporate too. But still, the subtext should be at the forefront of that. And once you do that, it is interesting because if you do a lot of oratorio, then you're presented with that text over and over again. So
kind of know what the glory is about. Yeah.
Right. So yeah, one might say, well, it's the same text. How can that be exciting? So that's when I feel that where the way that composer said it is very exciting, because then you start to understand what it meant to them and the way they're writing that. So just kind of being able to change that interpretation of the same text, just based on how it was set. So yeah, and then I like to, this is one difference of how I used to learn music, but, we used to just kind of learn your vocal line, and then maybe run it with an accompanist a couple times. But what I do now, which I love working this way, because I'm not an accomplished accompanist by any means, but my trusty little Roland piano over there, I can record the hams separately. I can slow it down and then I can speed it up. So what I like to do is just sit through and record my own accompaniment, because you don't understand, especially going into a rehearsal with an orchestra, if you don't know what is happening in the orchestra, like you're going to be lost, and you're not going to have that connection with that orchestra, I feel. So I just like to sit through, and even if it's hands separately, but just really seeing what is in that accompaniment, what you're going to be singing with, how it relates to your voice, the vocal part. So I like to take now that I have the technology to do that. That's how I like to kind of sit down and learn a big solo, like orchestral piece. And even if it's a choral, just in the choral part, I really like to have a knowledge of what everybody else is doing around that part. So
less room for error then, yeah, when you really understand it. Yeah.
And I do a similar thing. I look at, I tend to learn my part, and then if it's an aria or whatever, then I'll go out and try to find recordings. As a classical soloist, you show up at the dress rehearsal, and so you have, like one time, and if you're lucky, you get to run your aria twice. And then you're in front of an audience. So one of the things I like to do is find as many recordings of whatever that aria is, and then I just clock the tempo for everything, because it's shocking the variety of tempos you can find on a single piece. Of course, I have the tempo that fits me, but you never know whether the conductor, as gracious as he or she may be, is going to have a very strict opinion on what the tempo should be, or whether they're going to kind of go with your idea. And depending on how fast or slow a piece may be, you have to adjust. And so I kind of get a tempo in my head. And then I listen, and I see how much they're varying, and then I practice sort of my tempo plus or minus 10, sometimes 20%, just to make sure that when it's 20% slower, you're going to have to breathe a whole lot more often, and it's better to have a plan when you walk into your only rehearsal than it is to get caught with no plan whatsoever.
Sure.
Um,
Is it harder if the tempo's slower or faster?
It depends on the piece.
Sure.
I sang. Oh shoot! I gotta remember. Is it 83? Ein feste Burg ist unser Herr. Is that
I don't remember what number that is, but yeah.
Which has a soprano obbligato part, singing the hymn tune, and then the bass aria underneath is constant 16th notes. The whole aria is 16th notes, and if you go too slowly, then you can't make it through the phrase in one breath. If you go too fast, you can't quite get all the notes in, and so you have to kind of figure out where that sweet spot is. And I did that a couple years with an orchestra, and I had rehearsed it so fast that when I got with a conductor, I was like, "Oh, this is easy."
Easy, yeah.
Because I had already beat him for aggressive tempos, and so he looked over at me like, "What are you doing? I didn't think you'd be able to sing it this fast. Isn't that why you hired me?"
Nice, yeah.
The other thing that I find is you were talking about oratorio versus opera versus like a recital. Oratorio and opera are both kind of there's a lot of sprinting. You sprint your way through the aria, however long that may be, and then you sit down, or you go off stage. And for me, if you're doing a recital, it's so much more about pacing and stamina, and choosing your repertoire wisely, because it's easy to exhaust yourself in the first half, and then you have to come out and sing another 30 minutes of music. And so it's a much more careful planning situation. And also in general with a recital, you're choosing your own repertoire, so you have a little more control over the range and arrangement of the pieces. But it's much more a stamina game than a race to the finish.
Sure.
Yes, absolutely. I was going to say that I still have to tell myself when I get a new piece to not get overexcited about the music and just delve right in. And like, I mean, personally, of course, you have to understand what's going on and you have to connect to the text. That's extremely the most important thing. But like writing in a translation, I wouldn't say that's something that I enjoy, but I know that it has to get done. And like, sometimes it just feels like a chore, but it's like, I have to get through this. I have to know what's happening. And then I get to like have fun and sing this. And the other thing that I don't think anybody touched on is just the huge difference too with preparing an opera is that of course it has to be memorized.
Oh, yeah.
And so like you got to show up to that first rehearsal off book. And when you're talking about a Mozart opera with a million recitatives or Handel, that is really hard to do. And, you know, sometimes you have a rehearsal schedule and you know exactly what scenes you're working on, so you can kind of make sure those recitatives are up and ready as you go, but you don't always have that luxury and you can't always count on that. So it's tough. It's a lot of repetition work that you have to get into to really be ready, especially with something that has so much recitative.
Yeah, and occasionally I've shown up to operas and they like, "Oh, you remember what we told you about the cuts and the recitative on this spot? No, we changed that. Those are all back in."
Awesome.
It's
Really?
very bad when that happens. Very, very bad.
Yeah, I had that happen. We had a week of rehearsals, and he's like changing the recit on us when we arrived, and I was like, no.
You're like, I get an extra week then.
Yeah, right. You're gonna double my check? No, thanks.
I did an opera one. I did an opera one time in English translation, Madame Butterfly, and the butterfly showed up, and she had confirmed by email multiple times ahead of time which translation they were using. And when she showed up, it turns out it was a different translation. And so she had learned the entire thing in one. I mean, they were English in both cases, but so when you're talking about like having to prepare for the rehearsal, every staging rehearsal, she was reviewing the new translation.
What
Can you
a
imagine
mess.
the stress?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
I
kind of
sang
going. Or go ahead, Kevin.
Go ahead.
I was just
I
gonna.
sang Escamillo. Sorry,
No,
I'll finish.
Zoom.
I sang Escamillo in Carmen, and I'd sung the wrong translation, but mine was way better than the one they were using. But I had to rememorize the chorus parts to sing their text. But it worked out.
Yeah. Again, we musicians are flexible, right, and creative, and can make it happen. Kind of going along with the difference between singing different types of repertoire, one thing that I think, in my experience, is not really taught in training is how to sing in an ensemble that isn't a chorus, right? Like, we're going to listen at the end, or I'll give you the moment of Zen tonight is The Heavens Are Telling from the Creation, right? Which kind of has this trio of soloists singing, alternating with the chorus. And those soloists are singing in an ensemble, right? It's a trio, and that happens throughout oratorio repertoire, happens in opera. But that's different than taking voice lessons when you're really only studying solo repertoire. And it's different than singing choral repertoire, right? So I guess how is that type of ensemble singing as a soloist with other soloists? What's that like compared to singing in a chorus or singing as a soloist?
You know, it's funny because I feel like I'm torn in three different directions on that point, because sometimes I'm a choir director and sometimes I'm a singer in the chorus and sometimes I'm a soloist and sometimes I'm a voice teacher preparing students for any one of these situations. So it's funny. I think kind of a big picture, there seem to be kind of two general approaches to choir blend that I've experienced, and they tend to be the conductors who prefer. And no judgment call on either one of these. These are both well accepted schools of thought. But there are the conductors who prefer singers to kind of sing in a more unified, slightly straighter, slightly breathier, slightly headier kind of approach, where the overtones and the brilliance of the sound is the result of the interaction of all the different parts. So we might call that a more blendy choir approach. And then there are the conductors who are a little bit more of the approach that if everybody sings well, then a bunch of well-trained voices singing well together tend to resonate pretty well together, and everything works as long as, within reason, obviously. And both of these schools of thought, you kind of have to say within reason. And I have mostly sung in choirs where people just kind of sing out mostly. So a group like... and it's mostly because it's the professional groups where you can kind of rely on all the singers to have a certain level of professional training. And also it depends a lot on voice category. So my personal approach is not that different when I'm a soloist in a quartet versus when I'm in a group like Music of the Baroque or Chicago Symphony or Lyric or Grant Park, because my voice is not the most dramatic, most powerful, most ear-splitting voice out there. And so as long as I am reasonable, as long as I don't sing fortissimo on the top of my range when other people aren't, it tends to kind of connect pretty well to other well-trained singers around me. So the difference, I think, for me is a little bit of a difference of a degree, and it's also very much a difference of technique. If your technique is firmly grounded in a balance of head voice and chest voice, we'll call it a more bel canto approach, where every note can be sung loudly or softly depending on your artistic intent, which is not true for all techniques. There are some techniques that really specialize in making a lot of noise up top, or having a lot of stamina on A's if you have to be a Helden tenor in a Wagner opera or something. But if we take kind of a commonly accepted bel canto Rossini kind of technique, the ability to modulate your volume and sing with kind of a balanced tone pretty much takes care of the issues. And so when I sing in a quartet, I might sing 1 or 2 dynamic levels louder than when I sing in a chorus by default. But the actual technical approach is not fundamentally different. And so that's what I try to impart to my students and what I ask of my singers as well. That said, there definitely are times, and especially in certain situations, I'm thinking of like Handel, where the tenors tend to sit quite high and the altos tend to sit quite low. There are definitely situations where unless a tenor does something about it, it's not going to be a good result, not a good blend there specifically. But I think the most important thing is the ability to sing every note in your range at whatever volume and whatever vowel you choose to, so that your interpretive choices are not limited by your technique, but instead are of your own kind of conscious choice. That seems to take care of it most of the time.
I'll tag on to that a lot of you kind of just hope that a lot of the hard work might be done by the director when they're picking the soloists, and that makes for a good director when they know which voices will just go well together, similar timbres and of that nature. Because probably, so as far as a solo ensemble perspective, probably the biggest challenge is I feel like if the vibratos match, then you're gonna get a pretty good blend. And going along with what Klaus said, if you're singing a lot, it also has to do with the repertoire, and that's really going to dictate the way you're singing. You know, if you're singing singing with an a cappella choir, singing Lordson, that's just a completely different technique than singing with Chicago Symphony Chorus, Mahler. You know, like so I will say that yes, singing in a choral, orchestral, or symphonic choir, there's not a lot of difference in whether you're behind the orchestra or in front of the orchestra. Yes, I might give slightly a little bit more core to the sound or volume, but it's really just kind of up to because I mean, as a good musician, we can tailor our sound a little bit, you know, like we can listen and try to match that timbre a little bit, but that's really going to be at the detriment to our own just letting us sing, because then as the soloist you want to just let the soloist sing basically. So that's always your hope when you get there, that you're surrounded by wonderful other musicians who you guys can just sing and do your thing, you know. But yes, there's definitely a difference, because I sing with another local choral group and we do a lot of a cappella, so I definitely sing with not less it's kind of more of what you were talking about, Klaus, is that you're by creating this sound together, that's what's creating those overtones. So there's definitely a little bit less core to the sound, a little bit less vibrato, but really just, I think, being a smart musician, understanding the different repertoire, understanding what it entails and what it needs to help that music succeed, is kind of what we do. But yeah, hopefully the director takes care of most of the work so that you can get there and just just listen and tune and sing with your natural voice.
Yeah, I think that flexibility is really important, and I think sometimes, just in my experience, sometimes soloists don't want to be flexible, right? That they are, I'm the soloist, I want to do it this way. And yes, you should have an idea, and we do hire you to bring your interpretation, right? But it's got to be within the context of the whole, right? And so being flexible and being aware, having good ears and listening and adjusting is what makes, in my opinion, that kind of solo ensemble singing really exciting, is when it feels like it's happening for the first time right there, and they're really locked in and communicating. So I think you're right. Yeah.
They're singing in a small ensemble or singing in a big ensemble. It's more a question of what your brain is focused on listening to. I think, for me at least, if you're part of a section of 20 other people singing the same part as you, then your job is to make sure you're not only singing with the people on either side of you, but matching tone quality and vibrato and all that, so that you're fitting into the section and not sticking out. As a soloist, the job is more to listen to the other soloists and the orchestra, and blend with those, which can be a very different game depending on how the music is written. And I think as Klaus and Margaret have both pointed out, it's generally a little bit louder as a soloist. When you're one of 20 people trying to project over an orchestra, that's one thing. And when you're one of 4, then it has to be a little bit noisier.
Mm-hmm.
But it's both. They're both working in ensembles. It's just kind of different priorities from my perspective.
As a soprano, I actually find it quite difficult at times to go back and forth between my solo voice and my choral voice. I think as a choral singer, I tend to fall into trying to blend with others around me. So I'm like maybe overly sensitive to what I'm hearing next to me. And like, I'm always trying to match that. And sometimes that causes me to maybe undersing. And especially, there's a big difference from singing, with Chicago Symphony Chorus and like music of the Baroque. And so even just going back and forth between those two things and like straight tone versus vibrato. And so I have to be really careful, especially if I'm rehearsing a choral piece and then working on solo things at the same time. Like I have to be so careful because in my old life before COVID, it's like I could have a day where I'm teaching in the morning, then have a rehearsal, like let's say at Lyric Opera from 2 to 5, like opera chorus rehearsal, so like full out singing, and then have a music of the Baroque rehearsal from 7 to 10. And if I'm singing fully, through all of that time, I wouldn't make it. I'd have no voice, and every voice is different, but and it's hard when the person next to you is like singing their heart out, and like you want to be doing that with them, but like I've learned through the years like to know my voice and just know my limits, and know one of those points in my day I'm going to have to mark, and like to just be okay with it. And most conductors are very very understanding of that too.
One thing that I think it kind of goes back to what Klaus was saying about advising his younger self to just like listen to your body, right? And in a couple of weeks on CMS University, I'm going to be talking about singing over a lifetime and how your voice is always changing, right? Like, I feel like my voice finally stopped developing like at 32, right? It's like, and now I feel so much more comfortable singing than I did when I was an undergraduate, right? I hated voice lessons at a certain point because it was like wearing shoes 4 sizes too big. I just wasn't ready yet, and so I think what you're saying is what you both are saying in different aspects is that importance of knowing your voice and being aware of it and allowing yourself some room to, take time to develop or take, mark for a rehearsal or whatever, because your body better than anybody else, right? So that's
one other thing I thought of that nobody mentioned, but breathing is really the lifeblood of singing, right? It's the most important thing. It's what everything is built on. And a great conductor you always feel like is breathing with you. Like I'm thinking about like singing with Riccardo Muti. You always feel like, to me, it always feels like whatever he is doing with the music just feels like it's coming from my own body, in the sense that he breathes when I breathe, and he phrases the way I want to phrase. And I'm sure his interpretation is not exactly what mine would have been, but in the moment it feels like it's my interpretation. And I feel like when you're singing with a great group of soloists, it's a very similar feeling, because you plan a little bit in rehearsal. You plan, are we going to breathe here? Are we not going to breathe there? And so on. It's kind of decided. But there's this sense of communal breathing where you feel like you're breathing together. And in a choral section, in a larger chorus, that happens too. But there also are moments of staggered breathing and moments of, oops, I didn't quite make that phrase, so I'll just grab a quick breath here and nobody will know, and things like that. But one of the big differences when you're in a quartet, or some other sort of solo ensemble, we'll say, where it's really all about breathing together and connecting to the breath and phrasing together and having the tempos in performance be at least similar to the tempos in rehearsal, and because it all comes back to the breath in the end.
So we're going to end tonight with some lightning rounds here, and I'll look at the chat. But the first one is, what are your bucket list pieces? Doesn't have to be choral, orchestral, opera, whatever.
Brahms' Requiem.
Yeah, definitely.
I'd say for opera, it would be Octavian in Der Rosenkavalier. Also Marguerite from Damnation of Faust. And then Mahler 2, Resurrection.
Yeah.
It's funny. I've been very lucky. If you had asked me this 20 years ago, I would have given you 3 bucket list pieces. Brahms' Requiem, which I had a recording with the Chicago Symphony that I just loved, and I've gotten to do it with the Chicago Symphony in the chorus, of course. And Puccini's Turandot, which is my absolute favorite opera, and I would have loved to have been Calaf in that, but my genes and biology have not turned me into a Calaf. But I got to sing it in the chorus with Lyric Opera of Chicago. And then Verdi Requiem, which I got to do with Muti. The remaining thing on my bucket list is I absolutely love singing the Evangelists, the Bach Evangelists. I've done them many times, both the John and the Matthew. But I've had now for years in the back of my head that someday I would love to do them kind of Peter Schreier style, where conducting and singing the Evangelist would be really, really fun. I think it'd be really great. I think I'd still have somebody else do the arias. Because doing the Evangelist and the arias is not something I'm particularly in love with the idea of doing both, but conducting and doing the Evangelist, because in many ways doing the Evangelist feels like telling the story. I mean, you are literally telling the story, but it feels like kind of being a second conductor anyway. And so since I like to conduct too, that's the last thing on my bucket list, is maybe a St. John in German with a full orchestra and chorus and soloists, and conduct and evangelize.
Klaus, can I be your soprano in St. John? That's on my bucket list for sure. I love singing Handel, so for opera, I would love to be Cleopatra in Giulio Cesare. She has so many amazing, fabulous arias. I'd love to do also either soprano in Mozart's C minor, for sure, and maybe Adina in Elixir of Love.
That's good too. Here's a question from Eileen White. She says, what type of music mask would you recommend? Is there a brand that you found works well?
I would say none. No.
Yeah.
We've tried, let's see. I did a couple of recording projects this summer. So the summer was kind of while people were still trying things. So everyone had regular masks. Or when I say regular, I mean just, that you would wear every day. And there's definitely a lot of sucking into the mask that happens, which we weren't aware of. Was trying to maneuver like nose breaths for everything, didn't work. So then for the second recording project, we had the singer's masks, which look like the platypus ones, which sit out. But the challenge I found with that was that the top part would would sit right here, or right there. And because there was a lot of weight to it, it would kind of sit down. And so you don't realize I was singing how much like lifting you have to do right there. And so there was like this pressure pulling it down. So that also had its challenges. I don't know, maybe you guys found one that worked better.
We'll keep working on it.
I have yet to sing with a mask.
Do you feel that singing in a choir is a good precursor to singing as a soloist? Seen lots of nodding.
Yes.
That's good.
For sure, yes.
Yeah.
Because you don't want to be the person who just does their own thing as a soloist and doesn't hear the orchestra or comes in on the wrong beat or whatever. And the first thing you learn in a choir is to be with everybody else, right? So it's a fundamental skill. You don't want to accidentally be a soloist in a choir, but you want to have the same discipline as a choral singer when you are a soloist.
Excellent.
I would also tag on to that because as a child, you can't really start singing that solo rep, but there's a lot of choral rep that is appropriate for children's voices, where you're getting them introduced to, the sort of rep that they would potentially sing as a soloist one day. So that's really the only way I see that. As a young singer, you've really got to just start in a choir.
Excellent.
Yeah, you have to learn not only how to use your instrument, but how to listen to everyone else and fit in. Making music is 80% listening. You have to know how to make your sound, but you also have to, blend with what's going on around you, be that as a soloist or as a chorister.
Okay.
Just learning sight reading skills too.
Oh, sure. Musicianship. Coming
into college, I still credit being in children's choir for as long as I was for giving me the skills I have as a sight reader. It's huge.
Yeah. Okay, two quick questions to wrap up. Someone's asking kind of about the business side here. Do you work with agents and managers, or do you arrange your own gigs? And is it more that, or is it that you, as you've become more established, that people seek you out?
I don't have an agent, and I have found that almost all the work I do comes through word of mouth. Occasionally I audition for things. Most of the time when I audition, I'm actually auditioning because of a contractual audition where I'm a member of a group and I have to audition every 2 years or every 3 years or every year, depending on the group. But I do very little auditioning for gigs beyond that these days. Certainly you do a lot of that right up front when you first go to a new city or first start to establish a career. But after that, it tends to be word of mouth. I think that's probably true in businesses outside of music too. Sure. Is people tend to rely on the opinions of people they trust more than they do on random auditions or interviews. But obviously, the higher you go in the business, especially as a soloist, especially in opera, the more you find agents managing singers. But a lot of singers manage themselves, kind of at all levels. Yeah.
Okay, last question. Or go ahead, Margaret. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. I was going to say, I just feel like that switched kind of. I remember when I was in school and they said, you wouldn't get an agent or manager until you're too busy that you need one to manage all that. But then at that point, you've already got your gigs, and it's like, so I think there's a lot of self-promotion that happens nowadays.
Right.
Yeah, and a lot of managers don't find you work anyway, or agents, they don't find you work anyway. They just handle the business side once you get the gig. So it's and then you pay them 10 or 20% depending on the gig.
Exactly.
So, right. So it I think for me it's not worth that. If I were trying to travel the country or the world, then it would be worth it to have someone planning all that stuff for me. But I'm for the most part just singing in and around Chicago, and there's no reason for me to need that help.
The last question, I'm going to combine two here from the chat, which is, how do you prepare to sing the first phrase of each piece in a concert? Kind of what's your pre-concert routine? And someone else was asking, do you ever feel nervous anymore? So I'm going to combine these two into one question to end our evening here.
I'll just say that I don't know when it kind of happened, but I don't feel the nerves as much anymore, which is such a blessing because that was like what kept me back. That's actually what I would tell myself 20 years ago, going back to your first question, is that like life is too short to be nervous. Just get over it. And like, so along the way, I learned to just let the music take over. Yeah. So I don't know if it's just being a parent or something where you don't have enough energy to get nervous anymore or something. But I mean, you definitely still get excited. I would say that the nervousness now is more of an excited nervousness. And as far as preparing that first piece, I don't know, you just kind of get in the moment, listen to those introduction. I just love listening to the orchestra. If there's that always kind of snaps you into the moment. I don't know if maybe you guys have some other pre-concert rituals.
I mean, for me, nerves, I've definitely gotten a lot better about nerves over time. And I think it comes down to a few things. The number one thing is probably preparation. If you really feel like you know exactly what to expect and you can rely on your voice to respond, and you have completed the transition from baritone to tenor, so you no longer worry whether that note will come out, things like that, then you set yourself up to potentially be less nervous. The other thing is kind of managing your own expectations and not putting too much on yourself, in the sense that, I tend to get more nervous for things that I make a bigger deal out of in my mind. And so as you advance in your career and as you kind of find your niche and find your place and understand kind of the impact of what you are doing, for me, the nerves kind of started melting away for that reason, because I was no longer, and it's hard to explain, it's hard to put into words, but I'm no longer expecting. I know what to expect, and I know what I stand to win and what I stand to lose, and so most of the time I'm comfortable with that. And so there's less reason to be nervous. But of course, you're always nervous a little bit, or more than nervous, especially in performance. For me, it's excited. So I get excited before the performance in a much more positive way. I tend to get more nervous for auditions, because in auditions you tend to feel like you're being judged, and you feel like, oh, there are thousands of dollars of income hinging on the result of this audition, and I have a mortgage and so on. But once you're in the actual performance, like, you already got the gig, you're just sharing beautiful music with other people. So then it's more excited than nervous. In terms of actual preparation, I find that when I'm active as a singer, so when I'm singing basically every day, my voice is pretty much ready to go with relatively minimal warming up. I'll do, some scales, I'll do some arpeggios, I'll make sure that I can sing a step or two higher than whatever the highest note of the day is, and things like that. But I actually don't do a ton. I try to move my voice quickly, whether I'm singing legato repertoire or like a Handel oratorio or something. I always move my voice quickly the day of, and I always try to keep it light. I never sing heavy before a concert. But besides that, just a little bit of vocalizing, some breaths. If you do they're called semi-occluded vocal tract exercises, so that would be things like straws, lip trills, humming. I tend to do a lot of that because it's quiet. It tends to not bother people. You can walk down the hallway just kind of going like whatever. And that seems to keep the voice limber and ready to go. And then in the actual moment, like 2 seconds before you start to sing, breathe in the shape of the vowel. That's the most important thing. If your first thing that you're going to sing is Gloria, make sure that you're going and not Glo, because then you're like messing with the system right before you have to start singing, and that's a recipe for like a scratch or a crackle or a phlegm or a whatever. So
right. Good tips.
Yeah, preparation is definitely key. When I feel like I know the music upside down and backwards, ideally, you get to the performance and it's not the first time you've sung it. You've actually sung it hundreds of times on your own, with maybe with a voice teacher, with a coach, with a conductor, with the orchestra, and so it's just one more run through. There just happen to be people staring at you while you do it, or more people staring at you while you do it. One of the things that I learned when I was auditioning is I found that when Klaus was talking about, when you're auditioning, there's a job on the line. And I found that when I wasn't concerned about whether I got the job or not, then I stood up there and I was singing because I like singing. And to me, when I'm able to turn it into, the pianist and I are going to give you a little ditty. And if you like it, that's great. We're going to have fun. And you just sit back and you think what you think. And so to a certain extent, when I started singing for myself, what I enjoyed and, how the music moved me, then that takes a lot of the nerves away, because as Klaus was saying, you take the pressure off, because now it's just about, we're just making music in this moment. And I have also learned over the years that it's not always perfect, and every run through is a little bit different, and that's enjoyable and interesting, and not something to be afraid of.
Yes, that's so true. I've had to learn that the hard way, that it's not about them, it's about you. And you're not singing for them. I mean, you are, but it's for you. I'm definitely a person that, there's two camps of people, I think, outside of an audition. It's the people like chatting away, like, how are you? Where are you from? And, like, how's your day? And what have you been doing? And like, then there's the people that are like sitting with their score and like headphones on. I'm definitely that person. Or I'm the person that's like walked down the hall and hidden away from everybody, probably. I definitely have to have like a few moments of zen, me time, focus my energy before I go in to do an audition. If I'm talking to a bunch of people, it just kind of throws me off a little bit. Some people are so good at that, and I haven't mastered that. I think it's just I'm an introvert, and it's just me being an introvert and needing my me time.
Yeah, well, that's good too. Good focused. Well, thank you all for being here tonight. This was really lovely to get to know you a little bit and to hear such wisdom shared. So thank you. And I know I can speak for all of CMS that we're looking forward to collaborating with you as soon as possible. So thank you very much for being here, and have a good night. Everybody else, just a few housekeeping things. I want to invite you to come back next week, when I'll be talking about how to approach music from different genres differently, and kind of the development of how music developed, and then how we can use that knowledge to approach a piece by Brahms differently than we might approach a piece by Bach. So it'll be interesting. We'll be listening to lots of music. So if you are interested, please come back next week. You can use the Eventbrite link in the video description below to register. Please like this video. We've gotten some likes tonight. Subscribe to our channel. Share it with a friend or family member. The more the merrier here. And remember too that if you have missed a previous session of CMSU, you're able to watch all the recordings going back to August on our YouTube channel, so you can explore the back catalog. Finally, if you're able to make a financial donation to CMS to support this effort, we've made it pretty easy here, and all the links are in the video description below. So please consider that, and thank you very much in advance. Well, I already told you that our moment of Zen for tonight is The Heavens Are Telling from The Creation by Haydn. Let's take a listen. Thank you, everybody. Enjoy the snow, stay safe and healthy and warm, and I'll look forward to seeing you next week for another session of Chicago Master Singers University. Have a good night.